Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People.
Online shopping while we're dozens deep in queue? Not anymore. I worked for a few years part-time in reservations for a large casino and resort. We were frequently short-staffed on any given day, leaving us deep in queue and some PO'd customers once we got to them. It was very draining, and we had lots of turnover. 3 or 4 supervisors were present during each shift in the middle of the room while the workers surrounded the edges. During the day, we'd make trips up to the mid-floor open office to hand in forms, sign things, etc. They almost never jumped on the lines to help with the queue, though. Somehow too busy to help. One day, we were about 25 deep in queue, and I go up to have them sign something. The supervisor doesn't see me approach, and I notice she's online shopping for shoes or something. She attempts to quickly change the window, but it was too late. Keep in mind the supervisors could use the internet freely, but we workers were not allowed to use the internet at all, even during slow times. I decide that's bullcrap to avoid helping with the queue to online shop on the company clock, and all the time to do something that workers were not even allowed to do. So I figured out how to keep them all busy permanently. We had these things called profile merge slips. Basically, when a customer would call in to make a reservation, you should check our customer database to see if they've stayed before. By name, by player number, etc. But many would not do this, or wouldn't do it correctly. Therefore, you'd end up having a half a dozen profiles for the same actual customer. When we encountered these during our normal duties, we were supposed to fill out profile merge slips with the person's name, player number, and the various profile numbers they had, and highlighting what you believe to be the correct profile number, if you thought that there was one. These were turned into supervisors for them to correct within the database in their spare time, as we workers didn't have the ability or authority to actually make these edits or corrections within the database. You might normally turn 1 or 2 of these profile merge slips in each week. I decided to do these with every spare second I had, since we couldn't do much else. I systematically began going through the entire customer database, at least 20,000 profiles, beginning with last names with the letter A. I easily made dozens of these profile merge slips each shift. My record was 104 in one shift. Each of these profile merges probably took 20 minutes each for the supervisor to review and implement the changes. Sometimes they'd come back to me with not sufficient info for merge. I didn't care. I knew this and I'd submit them anyways. Not my job, nor did I have the database authority to figure out which one was actually correct, if any. As you might guess, this cut into their spare time free-for-all. So I do this for about 3 months, and they're so backed up now. Each day, I'm getting the approved and denied profile merge slips in my inbox for ones that I'd submitted several weeks ago. As time passes, they get more and more behind. And here's the best part. We suddenly are given a policy change. We can now all use the internet on our spare time. Great. I know this was purposefully directed towards how I was using my spare time, as it was never even a sincere thought before this to allow us unfettered internet access. Basically, they'd finally be allowing us the same rights they had in an attempt to get me something preferable to do with my time instead of profile merge slips. Nope, I still kept at it. Though I did poke around Reddit here and there. I never stopped submitting those bad boys every chance I got, and by the time I put in my 2-week resignation, they were 3 months behind in profile merge slips. It took months just to get through one letter of the alphabet. I'd only gotten to the letter H. I left that place so happy, knowing that workers finally got to use the internet because the bosses didn't like doing extra work. And instead, they essentially lost their own ability to use their spare time on the web. Shouldn't have been online shopping while we were in the queue. Edit. Not every supervisor was a jerk. There were many days where I actually liked all the supervisors on my shift and who were coming into the next shift. So I wouldn't turn my profile merge slips in that day. I think everyone breathed a collective sigh of relief when I didn't turn anything in, but there was one in particular boss, lipstick on a pig, who was just a straight B. Previously, as a worker, she would routinely hit the skip button on her phone to avoid taking her turn for a call, and it would pass on to the next poor soul. We were almost never supposed to skip calls, but not only did she do it routinely and openly, she got a promotion to supervisor. You can then imagine what she was like with an ounce of authority. So I'd save up my profile merge slips for a few days, and as soon as lipstick on a pig came in for a shift that I worked, I'd personally hand her my amassed 100 to 200 profile merge slips with my best smile. Here you go. Made some more today. Forgot to turn them in yesterday, too. Oops. That was the best part. Haha, awesome. And our second story. I bankrupt her and get her house torn down. My great-grandparents planted an orchard. It's now at least 120 years old. My grandparents and my parents were really proud of the peach trees growing in it and did their best to keep them in good health and well. We always threw a big party when the peaches were ready to be harvested and invited all of our friends and neighbors to it. I love those parties. The neighbors on the property to the south of our orchard were particularly fond of our peaches. They were a bunch of fine old people, and me and the old man Sam were pretty good friends. He taught me a lot about woodworking with hand tools only, and we had some great evenings in his workshop. We finished many a good whiskey in there together. In return, he got a lot of fine peaches, marmalade, homemade peach liquor, etc. Sadly, he died a good 10 years ago. Cancer's a real a-hole. His wife followed soon after. Many suspected it was of a broken heart. They had no kids, so all of their property was left to the state, except his tools and whiskey collection, which he had gifted me a few weeks before he died. In comes Karen. The name speaks for itself. Haircut, attitude, bitchiness, the whole deal. She bought the property of my late neighbors. We hadn't had the kind of money to buy it at that time, as we had some dire straits the years before and all of our savings were gone. The first thing she did, before actually moving in, was go around and make demands of the neighbors on the surrounding properties. When it was finally our turn to listen to her gibberish, she told me that we needed to remove half of the trees as the leaves were blowing onto her property. We told her in a polite way that we won't comply to those demands, as the orchard is a vital part of our family heritage, tradition, and life, and has been there for at least 120 years. She was pretty PO'd, but didn't do anything for the time being. There are a few things you need to know before I continue with the story. The workshop I mentioned before was situated right at the border to our property. It was a small timber-framed building, at least 160 to 180 years old. The regulations in my state are pretty strict concerning old structures. Every structure over 100 years is protected, and you need special permission to tear it down. Failing to get this permission can lead to a hefty fine. To get the permission to build a new building, it has to be up to code, and you have to ask your surrounding neighbors, and if they agree, you're good to go. Except there's one specialty in my county. You have to keep a certain distance to the border of the property to allow emergency services full access to your property. If one of these requirements isn't met, the building is illegal, or at least only partially legal, and can be ordered by court to be torn down. That might come in handy later. So back to my Karen. After our first encounter with her, she did her best to pester the whole neighborhood. She got the neighbor's dog put down because he allegedly attacked her brat. It later turned out she faked the attack. The dog was one of the sweetest and most innocent dogs you could ever imagine. A Bernese mountain dog. Big, but a real teddy bear. Anyway, she later got us to stop doing our annual peach parties, as she called the police every time for various reasons. Noise complaints, we had a band playing there in the afternoon. Arson, we lit a fire in a designated fire pit in the middle of our property. She called the ATF on us for allegedly making moonshine. My dad had a license to distill for our own consumption. In short, she was a real pain in the bum, and after 3 years, we decided it wasn't worth it to deal with various officers and law enforcement agencies every time we threw the party, and we decided to quit. After she'd reached this goal, she resorted to pestering us to remove the orchard. We didn't cave in, and some things started to get really fishy. Somehow the tires of our trucks got slashed, eggs got thrown at our farmhouse, our cat disappeared and surfaced a few days later in pretty rough condition. It looked like somebody had tried to cut his tail off. Don't worry, he healed up completely, but we actually couldn't prove that she did all that. Then came the day that she made her biggest mistake. She had a company come in a sort of secret operation and tear down the old woodworking workshop overnight. 2 days later, they started building a big garage/recreational center/house right where the shop was. But she missed one fine detail, which got pretty important later on. She didn't ask for our permission, nor the neighbors. A short while after, the trees right next to her property started to get sick. The leaves turned brown in the middle of summer, and the branches started to die. We lost 4 trees before we figured out the cause. Somebody had driven long copper nails into them. We had a suspicion, but couldn't prove it, so we put up some trail cameras. Perfectly legal, as it was our own property. We caught her red-handed. My dad confronted her, she apologized, and my dad, being the way too nice guy he is, wanted to let her get off the hook, but not me. The nail she drove into our oldest tree was the final nail in her coffin. I started to investigate. I had some friends at the administration of our county and asked them to do some inquiries. Turned out she hadn't applied for permission to tear down the old shop, nor for permission to build a new building. I further did some inquiries on the border of our property. Turned out the old markers vanished over time, and her building was about 3 feet onto our property. After I'd gathered all this information, I presented it to my parents. At first, they were reluctant, as they didn't want to start a neighborhood clash. But after I recounted all the things that she did to us and our neighbors, they were in. So let the games begin. First, we called the authorities on her for tearing down a protected building and presented them with all the evidence we gathered. Then we called the building authorities on her for building a building without permission, not up to code, and not only didn't she keep the required distance to the property border, she actually built on our property without our permission. Long story short, turns out the workshop hasn't always been protected because of its age, but also because it was a historical landmark which played a vital role in a conflict back in the 1860s. She got sued for this and had to pay a fine, the equivalent of about $150,000. She further had to demolish her newest built building, costing an additional $50,000, and got fined for this too, about $83,000, and had to rebuild the workshop at her own expense, which was another whopping $154,000, as it had to be period correct up to the smallest detail. Means it had to be built with the correct materials, with hand tools only, and to the correct dimensions. As you can imagine, paying professionals to build quite a large timber-framed building only by hand gets pretty expensive pretty fast. So all in all, it cost her an equivalent of $437,000, plus further expenses like lawyers, etc. This caused her to go bankrupt, so she had to sell the property in the end, which my parents bought, by the way. Last I heard of her, she was moving back to the big city. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video to the end, and I'll see you in the next one.